If you want to know how columnist and blogger Michelle Malkin feels about who's in the White House, her new book title says it all. Please welcome the author of Culture of Corruption, Obama and his team of tax cheats, crooks, and cronies, Michelle Malkin. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
I spent this weekend getting through most of the book. You write faster than I can read at this point. But I want to talk about the title, and I want you to expand a little bit about it. You'd be hard-pressed, you say in this book, to find an area of the White House and the Obama administration that's not corrupt, correct?
That's right. I scoured from top to bottom. And, of course, a lot of people are already familiar with the botched nomination process. Everybody knows about tax cheat Tom Daschle, Bill Richardson, who was involved in a lot of pay-for-play scandals.
What botched nomination? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about Tom Daschle, the first HHS Secretary nominee, who represented everything that is against hope and change. He's a revolving door lobbyist. He failed to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes on his private crony
and there
driver.
was nothing like that in the Bush administration?
Look, that's not, look.
I'm just wondering.
Of course there was. And if you are familiar with my work, Joy, you know that I have been at the forefront of criticizing cronyism and corruption in the Republican Party. I was the largest voice against Harriet Miers and Michael Brown and cronyism at DHS. But guess what? Newsflash. George Bush is not in office anymore. And it's time for the American public to reckon with the fact that what they were sold was a huge bill of goods.
And in what way?
Did you read the book?
Some of it.
400 pages.
I did. I read some of it.
I filled 400 pages over the last 6 months to talk about every broken promise, transparency, accountability, ethics. And I think that there is a turning point in this country, and we've seen it over the last several months, and particularly over the last week, Joy, as people are going back to their home districts during this recess and holding accountable not just Barack Obama, but the Democrat majority for failing to deliver.
From the people in your group, Republicans and right-wingers.
Do you want like I'm an alien, my world?
Conservative, you know, it's a different group of thinking. That's all. But I mean, do you think that a lot of Republicans like yourself want to move on from the Bush administration because there's so much corruption in that 8 years?
Well, you don't want to move on from it.
I don't, because I want to see.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to get the pus out of the sore before it will heal.
Again, you know, let me respond to Joy first, and then I would love to get to the friendly side of the aisle here.
I'm being friendly.
The point is that the only substantive response to the book so far has been moral equivalence. What about Bush? What about Bush? What about Bush? Yeah. What about Michelle Obama? What about Joe Biden, who has traded on his crony name for the past 30 years, who represented, again, the antithesis of hope and change?
No, because I don't want to take it off the subject of what you're going to...
I was just curious, you know, it seems to me, and it's just my opinion, but that tends to happen no matter who someone is if their family, their pedigree has been around a long time. I mean, it doesn't matter, as you say, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. Cronyism seems to live on all the time, and I understand you don't like it. What I'm interested in, though, is you say that you believe that this administration is more corrupt than other presidencies, and I wondered if you could explain.
I actually don't say that in the book. What I say is that you have to measure...
Okay, I just want to show you this so you know what side of the aisle. We're all on the same side of the aisle. See what it says right there? I didn't write that.
Right. Well, whoever wrote that did not read the book.
Okay.
What I said was that you have to measure this administration. That's not a quote in the book. You can't find it.
No, that's
what
what I'm saying. I just said I didn't make this up. This was just good.
What I'm saying, Whoopi, is that you have to measure this administration, the principal, foremost agent of everything fresh and clean, hope and change. Isn't that what we were sold this last campaign? And he rode in on a horse, a white horse, taller than any other in recent memory. And like you can talk to any young person who voted for Obama, they thought they were going to get something fresh and clean. We got Tom Daschle, we got Bill Richardson, we got Joe Biden.
So what would you have done?
Let me just, because I really want to get some of the facts out of the book.
I'm shutting up.
We have a technology czar who is a convicted shoplifter. We have a commerce secretary who is knee-deep in Chinagate campaign financing.
What is your alternative, though? That's my question. What is your, well, I just wanted to finish the question. Since this is the most corrupt, how do you see fixing it? That's what I'm asking.
Well, let's take this czar thing, because I think whether you're on the right or the left, the explosion of these unaccountable presidential appointees who have no congressional oversight, who have no transparency in what they are doing. We don't know how much our taxpayer money is spent on the budgets of people who have vast control over the economy, over changing the landscape, the electoral landscape. There are now 44 of these, okay? We've had a Homeland Security czar under the Bush administration, a drug czar under the Reagan administration, but not to this depth and the extent. What are these people doing?
Michelle.
We've got a health care czar who has been meeting, possibly in secret, with health care executives to cut them out. We don't know. That's the point.
What about as a person who was just voting for the first time, and I'm looking at 8 years of just craziness. I'm looking at a president who there's still trailers in Katrina that he did not fix. I'm going, I wanted to vote for a man that I thought could change this. I'm thinking that he is. I'm supporting him. I think that he's trying. What do you want me to do with this stuff? Because John McCain, had he won the presidency, there's a lot of stuff about him that you could write a book about.
I probably would have.
And so then, with all of this stuff that you have, then what is
the answer?
She has had an objective critique throughout the years
Two
on
things.
politics.
I have been in daily journalism for 17 years now, and I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I believe that knowledge is power. And you can see that in the resignation of the auto czar, Stephen Ratner, here from New York, who's involved in the quadrangle pay-for-play scandal, is involved in all sorts of nepotism, he had to leave. And it was through the force of public disclosure. I want people to read the book. And I want people to know that I dedicated this book to whistleblowers. It's not just us crazy right-wingers who are calling attention to this. I wouldn't have been able to write this book if it wasn't for people who were knee-deep in the trenches working for Obama, who now have buyer's remorse because they understand that hope and change was a lie.
But did you have the same feeling about blowing the whistle during the Bush administration when we went into a war that was uncalled for? To say the least.
Well, I believed in the mission, and I still believe in the mission in Iraq. And the fact is that, despite Obama's promise that we weren't going to get another 4 years of the Bush administration, guess what? He's not only continuing the surge in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan.
He is. And that is the point that we're totally out of time. Michelle, I want to thank you for coming. Do read the book. There's some great information in there. Everyone in our audience is going home with the book, Culture of Corruption. We'll be right back.
Blogger and author of Culture of Corruption, Obama and his team of tax cheats, crooks, and cronies. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
What's the book about?
I think that you can judge a book by its cover, Matt.
On that particular case, I'll get to that in a second. But President Obama says the Gates situation is a teaching moment. What has he learned, do you think, from this situation, the way he's handled it?
Well, I think he is a racial opportunist, and I think that he has learned that he shouldn't shoot his mouth off when he explicitly admits that he didn't know what happened.
A racial opportunist? He hasn't gotten to where he is today by being a racial opportunist, has he?
I think that he took that moment, used a health care conference that was a debacle, basically, and took this story, which is really just a local parochial law enforcement story, to try and ensure some sort of moment of his racial authenticity. And it backfired because he was wrong, and he should have admitted it. And I think for a president that has offered up hope and change in a new politics, it's just another example. And I wouldn't say that that's an example of corruption, but I think it is. I think it plays into this idea that a man who has hyped himself as something different and something new is nothing but
you conclude all of that based on one mistake he made in terms of a comment he made? I'm telling you, this comment. This particular comment sets that entire scenario up for you?
I think it's clear that that was a calculated move. Everything that this president does is kabuki theater.
You think this was a planned question and answer?
Absolutely do.
And the way he handled it and the fallout from it was something he was looking for?
I think that he overestimated the power of his authenticity in America. And it's just another example of a botched failure. And that's what I filled Culture of Corruption with.
Sonia Sotomayor was cleared this week by the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was pretty much a party line vote, 13-6. Lindsey Graham was the only Republican voting in her favor.
Yes, no surprises, fait accompli.
After the last election, it was said the Republicans need to broaden the tent. They need to reach out to minorities, reach out to Hispanics. Are those 6 no votes going to hurt Republicans down the road?
No, because they were 6 principled votes against racial preferences and the idea that somehow identity politics has a place in the court of law.
Why do you think Lindsey Graham voted in favor?
I think Lindsey Graham has a history of pandering to this idea that somehow the party should broaden itself for the sake of pandering to diversity.
Let me ask you about your book. In it, I mean, clearly we know by the title where it goes. You take on Michelle Obama.
I certainly do.
In this book, you call her the first crony.
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because she was steeped in the politics of the Daley machine. Her father was a patronage appointee of Daley. She's beholden to the type of hardball politics that Barack Obama says he is against. Her entire professional career was based on nepotism, and now she has brought almost every...
Wait. That's a very broad comment. Her entire professional career...
That's right. Read Chapter 2, and you will find that despite her Princeton thesis where she whined and moaned about the old boy network and how she couldn't get ahead because of her skin color, in fact, is a farce because it was one of those old white boys who put her in that position in the first place. And now this team of Chicago cronies, Susan Scherr, Valerie Jarrett, David Axelrod, and a lot of these bundlers that Obama had condemned are now installed in both the West Wing and the East Wing. They're ruining our economy, and I think that the book shatters the entire era of hope and change. Now, he helped kill it in a 6-month period, but we've documented it very clearly. Every inch of this administration is rife with corruption and cronyism, and it's about time they look in the mirror and admit it.
A lot of comments there. This is Today on NBC. We'll be back.
I think people can probably understand. In my case, I spent my entire career trying to preserve life and give people quality of life, even operating on babies in the womb, operating all night long sometimes on premature babies. And I get to meet those people, you know, when they're adults and productive adults. There is no way you can convince me that they're not important, that they're just a mass of cells so that you can do anything to them.
I want to ask you this. Have you met with the women who have to make these horrendous decisions when they have to make them of whether or not they can bring a child into the world? I mean, we talk about bringing children into the world all the time, but periodically some women feel, I just can't. And are you empathetic to them? Because we just had
empathetic.
Oh, good.
So this is what happens when you have the Women of the View talk to one of the most distinguished doctors in the world. Remember, Ben Carson is a doctor, or more specifically, a neurosurgeon. I may be reading Whoopi wrong here, but she seems to be playing an emotional argument against one of the greatest doctors in history. Now, instead of Whoopi taking on Ben Carson's argument of him saying there is no way that's just a bundle of cells, no, that's actually a baby, which means you can't kill it, Whoopi steers towards an emotional argument of, do you have any empathy for the people who have to make decisions to kill their baby? To which Dr. Carson responds accordingly.
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Very empathetic, and what I have said is that this is a job for us in the private sector. What we need to do is make sure that we provide adequate daycare centers for these mothers so that they can get their GED, their associate's degree, their bachelor's degree, their master's degree.
You're assuming that these are mothers who aren't educated. I mean, I'm talking about women who make that.
Of them.
I don't know that you can.
Let me tell you. Let me tell you a fact. Let me tell you a fact. The fact is, a lot of those young girls who are having babies out of wedlock, when they have that first baby, they stop their education. And that child is 4 times as likely to grow up in poverty. We as a society have an obligation to do what's necessary to stop that cycle from occurring.
Did you notice the reeks from the crowd when Dr. Ben Carson actually points out this fact? There are so many studies on this. Here's just one from U.S. News saying that poverty and children born out of wedlock are absolutely connected. If you're a fan of my channel or a fan of Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter, you should know that we all have mentioned this many times. The number one thing that will predict whether or not a child is a criminal, a failure, a success, a juvenile, whatever, is not the color of their skin or the way they talk or walk or even just poverty alone. It is being born into a single mother household. It turns out that kids need both a mother and a father. Who knew, right? Now, don't get me wrong, it's no different with a single father household, but there's a perpetuating cycle of single motherhood in the country. Now, let's look back on the video on what Ben Carson was saying. Ben Carson was addressing this point. He was only addressing this point because he was then going to say that society needs to take better care of these individuals and that the private sector could do a wonderful thing. But, of course, as you heard from the reeks in the crowd, there is very little opportunity to make the point of single motherhood like this without someone calling you a sexist or just reeking at you or saying you just hate women or something like that.
Important is birth control, then, to the Republican Party. They should be out there really applauding Planned Parenthood for supplying birth control, mammograms, and everything else. Why are they against Planned Parenthood?
Idiot Joy decides to make the false claim that is made by almost all Democratic leaders. Yes, Planned Parenthood supplies birth control. They generally only supply birth control because they know birth control is somewhat ineffective due to human error, as in women forget to take it at the same time every single day, which is what needs to be done for the effects to work. What happens if the birth control fails? They get pregnant again. Where do they go for their abortion? Planned Parenthood, of course. Now, something that upsets me the most about the Planned Parenthood argument. No, they do not supply mammograms, Joy. When Joy listens to her Democrat leaders like Bernie Sanders and even Barack Obama say this, she is utterly convinced that it is true. Yet, a simple Google search shows that they do not supply mammograms. This is just another leftist lunatic lie. Getting back to the overall point Joy made about Planned Parenthood, Republicans generally are against Planned Parenthood because not only do they not supply mammograms or prenatal care, they supply abortions. They are the abortion clinic of America. Republicans are generally against abortions. It's just that simple.
Are you against birth control, too?
I don't speak for the Republican Party. I speak for me.
Okay, for yourself. Are you against birth control also?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. And so I guess you believe in daycare centers and maternity leave and food stamps and all the things that go along with raising a kid if you don't have the money.
Here's what I believe in, because I get sick and tired of people, particularly progressives, saying Carson grew up poor. He must have benefited from government programs, and now he wants to withdraw all the programs from poor people.
We did not assume
Wait a minute. I've heard that so many times. You've heard it too. It's a bunch of crap. And what I really actually want to do is provide people with a mechanism for coming out of a state of dependency and climbing the ladder and becoming part of the fabric of America.
This is a great
We agree with that.
Really, Joy? You agree with that, Joy? Really? Maybe you do agree with that. You know what? Maybe you do. But you don't agree on how to get there. Also, I love the subtle punch in the face Carson made to progressives.
Yes, but I think my question... Actually, I'm going to let everybody else ask their questions. I don't
Well, it takes me to Obamacare, because you said it's the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery. How is it slavery and over 9 million people have it?
Let me tell you why.
Why?
Because this is supposed to be a country that is of, for, and by the people. The government is supposed to be there to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With this particular act, the government comes along and says, don't care what you people think. This is what we're doing. We're cramming it down your throat, and if you don't like it, too bad.
Getting into the war.
Whoopi made the most popular leftist argument. I really felt the necessity to pause here just to remind you of how to combat this leftist argument. So let's review. Ben Carson points out how Obamacare is a disaster and how it doesn't advocate the principles of a free society, to which Whoopi responds with, kind of like getting into a war. For one, it depends on which war you're referring to, because war powers are granted to the United States government in the Constitution, obviously, and forcing people to buy health insurance is not granted to the United States government in the Constitution, obviously. But above all else, it's a complete avoidance of the argument. Ben Carson is destroying them on Obamacare. Instead of these leftist ladies of The View responding directly to Carson's argument, they completely avoid it altogether and start talking about something else that has absolutely nothing to do with Obamacare. Yes, we can agree certain wars were bad. Just because certain wars are bad doesn't mean that Obamacare is justified in any way, shape, or form. Simply put, one mistake does not justify the government to do another mistake.
That essentially shifts...
Because we did that. We've done that. That seems to be the way of the nation.
But it shifts the relationship between the people and the government. The people are supposed to be at the pinnacle. The government works for us. It's not the other way around. And we need to restore that.
Okay.
That's very important.
All right. Are we done?
Anybody else?
I don't
I just wanted to ask one last thing. I mean, you said that you don't necessarily relate to the Republicans, and you don't really say you're a Democrat either. So why do you feel this way?
I said I don't speak for the Republicans. I didn't say I didn't relate to them.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing.
Is there anything about the Republicans that you don't relate to?
Well, I am not a highly partisan person. The issues that affect us are imminent financial collapse if we don't change our ways.
Forgive me, Dr. Ben.
You know,
Forgive me.
they're not Republican or Democrat issues.
Dr. Ben Carson, y'all. Members, wait. Members of the audience, you're all going home with Dr. Ben's book, A More Perfect Union. Thank you, Dr. Ben.
So here's Ben Carson, probably the nicest guy there is, and these women can't even carry out a sophisticated discussion with him. You can tell that all they do is talk crap.